Hey, y'all, and welcome into the Nolecast. This is Bud Elliott, and Ingram has the night off. Happy birthday, Ingram. He's actually at a concert with his lady. So tonight I'm just going to be taking some questions here, dropping a little intel and giving some thoughts after having a chance to rewatch the Florida State game. And Graham will be back in time for the Syracuse Preview. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. As always, we thank our title sponsor, Louisiana Hot Sauce, as well as Tarpon Cellars. Just awesome products right there. I put Louisiana Hot Sauce on basically everything except for my Tarpon Cellars wine. Tarpon Cellars wine, a great gift to give somebody for the holidays coming up. Maybe bring a bottle of it with you to Thanksgiving. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get into our questions. Most of these come from Patreon, but some of them also come from email and from Twitter. That's just nolecast@gmail.com, at Nolecast, or patreon.com/Nolecast if you are so inclined. The first one comes from Dan, and he says, why doesn't FSU run more RPO? Well, they did run some RPO in this game. They ran some in the first half, a little more in the second half, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. Generally, teams that can man you up are going to make it more difficult for you to run RPOs. And Louisville is a team that can play man if they want to. Wake Forest certainly came out and played a lot of man. If you're playing man on the back end, that is a better defense to play if you have better athletes. Obviously, there are some vulnerabilities, but you're not necessarily going to get sucked up in that run read if you're that defender, if you're in charge of guarding that man. So that is one reason why teams are playing FSU more manned up than they have in the past. At least according to Kenny Dillingham. I think the numbers back him up as well on that. So that's kind of one of the main reasons. That you can't just, hey, let's go play more RPO if teams can just man you up, which so far they've been able to. There was a bit of a problem in this game, too, in that FSU's receivers, for the most part, were pretty locked down. And with the offensive line being so hamstrung, Louisville routinely got pressure without blitzing. So a 3, sometimes 4-man rush would get home. And that was really problematic because if you can cover with 5 and you can get home with 3, you know what? That's problematic because that means you have 3 other defenders to kind of be wild cards. If you want to put them in some robber zones or have one play deep middle, you can do kind of whatever you want with them. And that's difficult to stop or to beat really as an offense, but certainly certainly something that maybe they'll look into doing more of depending on the team, right? All right. So Rashay asks, did you all hear the news about Evan Stewart? I assumed recruits would at least wait until their season was up. What are potential risks for these recruits might be overlooking? So Evan Stewart is a 5-star receiver out of the state of Texas, a recruiting battle, I think, between Florida and Texas. A super fast kid, really good player. He's decided to basically opt out of the rest of his senior season and to go get ready to play in college. Ultimately, I don't know his personal situation. I know he's pretty famous on TikTok, obviously, and we'll probably be able to monetize that. I don't know exactly how TikTok advertising works, but somebody who got in on the podcast monetization game pretty early on, I wish him luck in that endeavor. But look, if he's got what he thinks he's needed to get out of high school football, he's not an employee of whatever high school he goes to, right? Bottom line, you are risking more injury by continuing to play those high school games if you're already that level. Now, we want to see you keep playing them. Personally, as an analyst, as somebody who evaluates these players, I want you to keep playing because I want to see more tape on you. I want to see that competitive temperament, et cetera, et cetera. But look, what if Josh Sweat had not blown up his knee in high school, right? He was already a megastar by the time he got hurt. What if he had decided to forgo his senior season? Does he do better at Florida State? Does he get drafted higher? I mean, I know he just got a nice second contract in the NFL, which is awesome. And congrats, Josh, on that. Does he go second round, maybe, as opposed to when he went? You see this in baseball plenty, right? Some guys will play high school ball, but on the pitcher side, hey, I'm only going to pitch this many innings or whatnot. Like, I'm not going to throw 100 and something pitches in a game. For a lot of us, high school football is an opportunity of a lifetime as far as being able to be part of a special team, and you're going to have these memories forever. But for the very select few out there, the guys who are like no doubt 5 stars, it's kind of a means to an end. And once you reach that end, and you have all the scholarship offers you could ever want, I think more guys will do this probably coming up, not less. Second question from Rashay: what can Norville and the staff do in the second half of the season to persuade uncommitted recruits to join the 2022 class? Well, if you read some of the comments from recruits to Chris Nee on Noles 24/7, they do a great job. You can tell that FSU is selling playing time. That has been a consistent message for them throughout the year, is to sell that playing time, right? Keep selling it. You can kind of point to the product on the field and say, hey, you don't think there's playing time? I thought Norvell's not rant, but just kind of impassioned answer to Corey Clark's question was pretty good. I don't know what else he can really say at this point. I mean, there's certain things he can't say, right? Like, he can't be like, oh man, our defensive backs show up to meetings high, so I'd like to go ahead and clean house there and start with a clean slate, but those are some of our more talented kids in the program, so we're having to still work with them, even though I didn't recruit those guys who did that. Got to try to keep that going, and maybe we can turn them around. Offensive line-wise, guys, we felt good about 7 dudes coming in. 3 or 4 of them are hurt. A couple of our guys right now who are starting are pretty obviously playing hurt or not recovered fully from off-season surgery based on the way they're playing compared to what we saw to them last year. There's playing time to be had all over the place. But look, as a recruit, you're going to have to determine, do you want to be part of something like this, or do you want to go somewhere that's already more established? And there's nothing wrong with going somewhere more established, right? Just not. That's just, it is what it is. And the kids who want to pick something that's going to be less established, that may be the type of kid that you need in this program right now to get some things turned around with this long-term rebuild. All right, Matt writes, the situation with FSU feels similar yet strange. We are struggling, often looking inept on the field, like we did with Willie Taggart. Weirdly, I believe more Norvell because of the relationships in recruiting and the don't quit in his team as a whole. Does the booster base feel the same way? For example, do the boosters who write the checks for the program do so reluctantly or with an excited eye to the future? Look, I can't speak for every booster out there, and I think different boosters probably have different thoughts. The boosters I know are pretty disappointed in the Jacksonville State loss. There are certainly some really big boosters who listen to this show, and so they're pretty apprised of all the injuries on the offensive line and the fact that, like, anybody with common sense knows this team's not going to score very many points right now. But I'm sure they're pretty disappointed in the defensive side of the ball, because that side of the ball has more talent than like it's playing. And I think that they're probably both understanding and disappointed. One of the key things here, as compared to the last staff, is that Norvell and company really sold this to the important people as a rebuild and not a reload. Like, internally, that's been the messaging. They got in here. They knew they weren't good. They knew the roster was going to be messed up for quite a while because of all the short season classes that comprise it. Again, there's a reason they took 12 transfers, because the players on the roster aren't very good, or some of them had, some mental problems or real behavioral type issues. And it was kind of a cluster in part. Although the academics did get a lot better under Willie, which does help Mike in the long term for sure. I think most of these guys are pretty understanding that rapid coaching change can cause problems, big problems, but yet they're still not happy with, especially with the Jacksonville State loss. Like, that's the one that is kind of unforgivable. You really messed that up as a coaching staff, and I think it sent a message that maybe you don't have the buy-in from the team that you thought you had. All right. Lee asked a question about Norvell's message/rant. Do you think it was needed? I mean, look, he got teed up. I obviously, I think Corey asked him a good question, but that was a fastball, and he hit it out of the park, I thought, right? Seeing him get fired up is something I think probably more fans wanted to see. it can't hurt to send that to recruits, I would say. Ali also asks, you guys said before it gets worse before it gets better, and people just didn't want to hear it. With that being said, is this team as bad as their record indicates? I want to bring this up because I think it's a point I want to discuss, right? You can argue that this team is as bad as its record because it really screwed up the Jacksonville State game. However, their second order wins on the year, which is not a perfect stat, but it is a stat that I do pay attention to, is 2.2. So like the baseline metrics say this team should be 2-2 based on how they've played. They've dropped all the way to 73rd in SP plus. But 73rd, and they started out 50th in the preseason. 73rd is not like 100th or 110th. 73rd is not good, and I expect they'll keep dropping as more of the preseason stuff filters out of that. But ultimately, they've played a top 20 schedule to date, right? Or top 15. I think they're 15th nationally as far as schedule strength so far. And they're 0-4. That's difficult. I do have some interesting stats on this, and I'm interested to know what y'all think, because I've seen a narrative out there that FSU, like, they made all these changes and they kept playing, really well. Ultimately, I do think that part of the reason that they're playing better in these second halves is that opponents are not playing with the same amount of focus. I think they are taking their foot off the gas. You ran more man coverage in the second half, and yet I do think Louisville was trying to protect its quarterback some, and he didn't take off and run maybe quite as much as he could have there in the second half as you were playing more of that man coverage. Here's an interesting note. So EPA per play. Before FSU goes down 3 scores in the game, FSU's offense, negative 0.16. FSU's defense, 0.25 allowed. So really, really bad there. Now, after FSU goes down 17 points through the rest of the game, FSU's offense, 0.12. FSU's defense, negative 0.07 allowed. It's a complete turnaround. So you tell me, like, is it adjustments they're making? Are we really buying that? Or do you think it's more to do with these other teams letting off the gas? Because when other teams are playing these guys straight up, FSU can't do a damn thing offensively or defensively. They're terrible on both sides of the ball until these other teams get these really big leads. I know what I think. I'm not going to say adjustments don't matter at all, but ultimately, I think part of this is opposing teams realizing FSU is not very good and kind of losing some focus and taking their foot off the gas. I fully believe that. So anyway, otherwise, explain those numbers to me. Explain to me why this team is so bad until they get down huge. None of the stuff FSU dials up is going to work compared to what they dial up after they get down 17 points through the rest of the game. Is that? I have a really hard time believing that, guys, personally. So, yeah, it's good that they don't quit in games, but that only matters to judge whether they're quitting or not. But yeah, these metrics are not picking up on this right now. They are seeing that the game is not technically in garbage time yet. And I do think that opposing teams are screwing up, not keeping the hammer down more in these games, right? Like, they're not up 30. They're not 40. Like, in some cases, they're up like 18 or 15 or 16. And that's probably not the time to let off the gas, but it's probably human nature, having seen FSU lose to Notre Dame and then lose to Jacksonville State and then really just get worked by Wake Forest. I think it's kind of natural to think, okay, we have this thing in the bag, and FSU comes out and they still fight. All right, Logan asks, what are your thoughts on the general buy-in of this team after this poor start? Would you say there may just be a small handful of players who aren't completely bought in, or more? Ingram said a few weeks ago he wished some players had the 75% level of buy-in that Sean Corbin had, and we'd be in great shape. He might be misquoting a little. From what has been hinted at above, or before, there are some players, most notably a very talented corner, who may not have shown proper buy-in during practice throughout the week and are being held accountable for what I could see during the second half of the Louisville game. Many players are still playing hard and trying to win as a team and playing their role. Look, they're still playing hard. There's a reason they haven't cut these guys loose yet. And part of it is talent, but I think part of it is because it's not like they're all really bad kids, right? I think they're still trying to work to get the full buy-in from some of these guys who Mike and his staff didn't recruit. The one thing is, and look, coaching staffs are always going to tell you, oh, my guys are bought in, right? I'm still trying to work on these other guys. So take that with a grain of salt. But that is the feedback I'm getting. So maybe there is something to that. Matt wants to know, he says, hearing quotes from recruits about FSU and their start really emphasizes the relationships built and the sales pitch of early playing time. No doubt about it. That is a big thing, right? You would think that FSU would lose all these guys, being 0-4, and probably headed for what, 3-9 as the most likely outcome. At this point, is 2-10 more likely than 4-8? I think so, probably. We'll see if they can beat Syracuse this weekend. If they can, then I'll probably change my mind on that, obviously. But look, this staff did work its butt off to recruit these guys and to build these relationships. And part of that is just being honest in recruiting, right? Part of that is saying, hey, we're not going to be very good. There's a reason we need you to come here. And not promising these guys, hey, we're definitely going to go to a bowl. Hey, we're going to win 8, 9, 10 games. I don't think they did that. I think their message was very much process and rebuild focused. And look, they'll lose some guys out of this class, right? I mean, do you really think they're going to sign Trayvion Williams, the kid from Mississippi? Maybe, but Woodson's going to have to work his butt off to keep him, obviously. Are they going to keep Aluba? I don't know. He's always wanted to keep his options open and take more visits, and he's probably the best offensive lineman they have committed right now in the class, and George is on him. So we'll see. We will see on that one. But I do think they've done a really nice job recruiting this class. Here's a question from Matt. He asks, how does the staff balance that message to recruits and keeping the current roster engaged and not lose the locker room? Well, obviously you don't want that message to get to the current roster too much, but you have to sell playing time as opportunity. Like, you don't want to tell the kids, hey, you don't want to tell the recruits, hey, our current kids suck, because then you're kind of speaking ill of them. You want to say, hey, use your eyes. Let's identify. You guys can see it. There's playing time to be had here. So, although if you look like you did on Saturday, right, where the defensive backs and linebackers look poor, I don't know. If you're a DB in town, if you're a linebacker in town, if you're Earl Little Jr., if you're Wesley Besaint, what do you think coming out of that? Those guys aren't going to go on the record and bash the team, but realistically here, I'm sure that they weren't real impressed with that performance. If you were in the stadium, did it ever really feel like FSU had a shot to win that game? Not for me. I know what the scoreboard said, but it never really felt like they had a real shot to win that thing. Felt like they were out of it after about the first 20 minutes of the ballgame. But with those two kids, look, if for some reason Bama doesn't have room, I think FSU actually has a shot, which is crazy to say, right? With Besaint, I know a lot of people think Miami for him. I got to tell you, I think that West Virginia and Penn State are probably equally big threats as Miami. Obviously, Miami's not having a good year. Their linebacking core does not look very good, so there's playing time opportunity there, just like there is in Tallahassee. So we'll have to see kind of what happens with that one. All right. Cool. So let's, TJ says, do you think our limited, quote unquote, offensive success has come from the fact that in games 1 and 4, there was no plan to rotate quarterbacks? Also, what's going on with Travis J of what you can speak of? Thank you for your realistic thoughts, and I hate that I missed last weekend. Well, we missed you too, man. Township was a blast. A lot of folks came out. We were excited to see them. Certainly, we'd like to have even more, but we understand kind of how the season is going. Well, I think that the main thing is that the Notre Dame game was by far the healthiest that the offense has been all year. And the health has just declined every week, essentially. I guess they were less healthy for Louisville than they were for Wake Forest. So the offensive health has kind of declined every single week as far as who's in the lineup and who's healthy in that lineup. Again, as I quoted earlier, like let's take a look at what happened before you got down by 3 scores and what happened after against Louisville. I mean, I'm looking at it here, and total EPA before and after. Let me just go ahead and pull this up just so we make sure that we get all of this right for the offense. Because Jordan Travis wasn't available to play, obviously, with his arm dinged up and his knee in the brace. Look, total EPA for FSU before they got down on offense, before they got down 17 points, negative 1.56. Total EPA on offense after that fact, 0.3. It's just a big difference, okay? And maybe there's some adjustments in there. But realistically, you start hitting runs once you're down 3 scores, you start hitting these short passes that turn into some decent yak, you're not bombing it over the top on these guys. These defenses a lot of times are in pass rush stance against you. They're trying to get their sacks. They're trying to tee off. And FSU, to its credit, kind of realizes that's the only way it can move the ball is by continuing to try to run, throw some of these screens, run a little bit of that RPO game, especially when the opponent's pass rushing. And we'll see, we'll see how it works out, right? So, yeah. That's kind of my thought on that. I don't think it has a whole lot to do with not rotating the QBs. I mean, it wasn't like Milton played super well. He took a couple sacks that were on him. He doesn't have an arm to drive the ball. I think his anticipation is very strong. His release is super quick. I want to stop and thank our friends Shannon and Chad on the legendary team at Hamilton Home Loans, 844-FSU-LOAN, 844-FSU-LOAN. Man, we had a ton of folks who came out to the Township Listener Appreciation Event who had used Shannon and Chad for their home loan. Over 200 now Nolecast listeners have done. So we really appreciate that, guys. That is just absolutely awesome. Let's go ahead and take Jordan, there's no name on this question, but it starts out, Jordan Travis is clearly who you want running the offense right now if he's healthy. However, after watching what we had the past 4 games from Milton, is Purdy really that far behind with understanding the offense/game processing for the coaches to accept Milton's clear deficiencies with mobility and ability to push the ball downfield? I think so. Yeah, I do. I think if you started Purdy against Syracuse, I would definitely pick Syracuse. I don't think Purdy is ready, just from everything I hear. Sometimes coaches are wrong, practices are wrong. Sometimes stuff like that happens. I guarantee you they didn't think Jordan Travis was going to be as good as he was when they stuck him in there last year. So I'm not going to come out here and tell you that there's no way they win if they played Chubba Purdy. It's possible, but just I don't think that is something that feels super likely right now, He continues, or are we keeping Purdy off the field to ensure we don't mess up playing time message for Duffy? Look, based on what I've heard about Purdy, I don't think that they're worried about Purdy scaring off Duffy at all. He writes, one would think, given the offensive line struggles and injuries, you'd want some mobility behind the line. Yeah, but you also want the ball to come out fairly quickly, and I don't know that that's really happening with him. Given that he's listed on the 2 deep now, do you think we see Purdy in this game if Travis isn't able to go? Or is it another game where they'll keep the offensive starters regardless of score for reps? I can't write it off. Purdy probably could play some in this game, maybe. I mean, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it wouldn't shock me if they use him some in some of the running packages. He's more physical than Milton is, obviously, and a better athlete, I think, at this point in his career, given Milton's injury history. So who knows? Maybe we'll see it. I don't think he's going to be the answer unless he takes a big time step this offseason, which is possible. But again, how likely is it? I don't know. Steven writes, take a look at Frank Beamer's first 6 years at Va Tech. 87, 2-9, 88, 3-8, 89, 6-4-1, 90, 6-5, 91, 5-6, 92, 2-8-1, 24 and 40-2, no bowl games, no appearances in the top 25. 93, Beamer was able to turn it all around, and Va Tech went 9-3, earned the win in the Independence Bowl, and finished number 22 in the country. The rest is history, as the Hokies didn't have another losing season until 2018. I know college football is a different landscape now, but there's something to be said for waiting out several 5+ years with a coach to see if you can really turn things around. If this was not the early signing period era, and if FSU had not just fired a guy after 19 games, I think that next year would be a super important year for Mike Norville. As it stands now, if I was a betting man, I would bet that he would get through 2023. I think they're going to give him 4 years. You can argue they made a mistake firing Willie when they did. Do I agree with that? I don't know. I think there's reason to say yes, there's reason to say no. Part of the reason to say yes, though, is hindsight, because they didn't know that COVID year was going to come, obviously, when they made that move. And that has had a significant impact on this program, no doubt. So I just don't think they're going to be in a position to make a rash move. I mean, who's going to come in here and turn things around super fast? They need Mike and his staff to keep recruiting, and they need to see what they can do as far as developing players and just provide some level of stability. I do know that the power players are confident in what Mike is doing at practice and behind the scenes as far as laying the foundation. But I don't think any kind of major turnaround is coming this year or next. Obviously, like this year, the thing I think that could help them out is if they get some people back who can block, because they're not going to get better receiver talent all of a sudden, and the quarterback room is not going to transform all of a sudden. The only real major change I could see helping them this year is getting some of those offensive linemen back and healthier. Maybe the bye week helps them out with that. But, right now, I do think he's going to get quite a bit of time, just because they're not in a position to make any kind of crazy move like that. All right. Caleb asks, hey, can it be said that FSU has been exempt from these type of rebuilds due to the long tenure of Bobby Bowden and the somewhat smooth transition to Jimbo for the last 40 years? That being said, it seems that literally every blue button program in the country has gone through what we are now experiencing in order to get continuity back and to rise again to relevance. I look at it as it's our turn now, and understand that, as you pointed out repeatedly on your pod, this is a several-year rebuild, and we're going to have to take some lumps along the way. I mean, what program out there has not rebuilt in recent memory? Like in my lifetime, what program has not rebuilt? The only one I could think of that hasn't had, losing seasons and, a stretch where it just looked like they would never get it turned around and it was hopeless, is Ohio State. Right? I mean, Ohio State, I don't think they've had a losing season that I can remember in a really long time. And if they did, they certainly didn't have multiple in a row. Other than that, I mean, Georgia's had them, Bama's had them, LSU's had them, Florida's had them, Miami's had them, FSU has had them, Clemson has certainly had them. This feels insurmountable right now. And I do think FSU's situation is worse than others because of the way its roster is right now. And with the portal and the ESP, it makes it more difficult to try to nail and thread that needle of the rebuild. But it's not impossible. And the first step is just making any step in the positive direction, which I think that they're doing in some measure right now. All right. Caleb also asked about a rumor De'Aaron King is done for the year. If it happens to be true, how winnable does that game become? I like the Garcia kid Miami signed last year, but certainly a true freshman coming into Doak against the defense against the run defense, it's pretty good, I think. Against the pass defense that has not shown any signs of being good at all so far this year. We'll see how well Miami can throw. The real question there will be, is that a game where you can block them? Right now, I think the answer is no, right? I don't think you have any shot to beat Miami with this current offensive line setup. If you get a lot healthier, and if King doesn't play, then you'll have a shot to beat them. Will they be favored? Yeah, they'll still be favored. But right now, Miami is not a team you can beat. with this offensive line configuration because you just won't get those guys blocked. And that's just like, I mean, you allowed 11 tackles for loss in this last game on 75, 76 snaps. Kenny Dillingham can say, stand up there and talk about how like they got a lot of the penalties cleaned up, but this time they just got behind the chain so much. Yeah, but that's not play calling. A lot of that is your guys just getting beat. They're not having quite as many of these just Olay missed assignments. There's still some, but like to me, the offense doesn't look terribly coached. I think the defensive side has some coaching issues, and I do think they'll probably have a new defensive coordinator next year, barring some miraculous turnaround. You almost have to, I think. But the offense is just a player issue to me. I'm very confident in the track record that Mike Norville and those guys have on the offensive side of the ball of getting things done and scoring points. They're pretty clearly overmatched at this point. All right, Mason asks, hey guys, longtime listener and huge fan. You kept my expectations for FSU football realistic for the last 5 years. My sanity thanks you. Mason, I appreciate it. I feel like we still overshot it this year, but I just couldn't have predicted that loss to Jacksonville State. If you had told me they were missing this guy and this guy and this guy, I probably would have picked Wake and Louisville over them, as I did in the preview show. But in the preseason, we didn't know they were going to have all those guys out. My question is, do you think there will be a point this season where a light switch flips for this team and the penalties, turnovers, etc., start to decline to a normal, competent level? I read some quotes recently from the coaches where it seems they legitimately thought the complacency of this team as a whole wasn't going to be this bad. It's just the coach covering shortfalls for legitimate belief. Look, I saw what Jarvis Brownlee said as far as they were kind of complacent coming out or whatever the term he used was. Lackadaisical, I think maybe is what he said. Do you really buy that? Because I don't. I don't buy that at all. I think that this is not a very good pass defense, especially when it has to play zone against a mobile quarterback. And I think that some of these opponents are not staying mentally sharp throughout the game once they get a big lead. I think they're like, all right, now we got him. And to its credit, FSU keeps fighting. I just don't buy the idea that all of a sudden that FSU is just turning it on. I don't think FSU has an effort problem for the most part. I really don't. Will they have a decline in penalties? Maybe if they get some some offensive lineup continuity. It's possible. All right, let's go ahead and thank our friends at Congruity HR. Make sure to contact those guys at Congruity HR. An awesome time with him at Township. Matt Lewis has been a great sponsor for us, and they continue to be. And look, the feedback has been great. Everybody who's called those guys up absolutely loves them. HR solutions, payroll solutions, whatever you need, Congruity helps your business with its alignment. So give them a shout, Congruity HR. Tell them the Nolecast sent you. All right, let's go to James. James says, hey, a little Travis Hunter talk, never heard of Noel fan. We have big dreams of Hunter excelling at receiver and corner, but realistically, he eventually has to pick one for the NFL if he achieves his potential. When a player has the talent to develop either way, how do evaluators decide where a player would develop best? Well, with receiver, I think part of it is ball skills, right? Do you have great hands? Do you pluck the ball well? How do you play the ball in the air? If you're really, really good at that, I kind of want you to play receiver if I'm an evaluator. How do you mirror? How's your back pedal? How are your transitions? Are you a guy who is better when he knows where he's going, or are you a guy, relative to competition, who's really excels with reacting? And I think Hunter, honestly, has pretty good reactionary skills and great closing speed, but his ball skills are also really nice. So that's why it's so hard. I do think he's going to play both ways in Tallahassee. Mark says, do you guys think when putting together this coaching staff, Norville put too much emphasis on recruiting and not enough on on-field coaching ability? No, I actually think the opposite. And I think if they make some changes in the offseason, they will probably get even better recruiters in here. Look, it's going to become a harder product to sell for the 2023 class coming off this season. I don't know much about the history of the most position coaches, so I may be way off base. Just going what we've seen in 13 games, according to Mark. If this is the case with the state of the roster, is the recruiting over X's and O's a better strategy anyway? So you just finishing out his question. I kind of jumped the gun there. Look, I think they're going to go more heavily recruiting when they make some changes this offseason. I would set the over-under for offseason coaching changes at like 2.5, probably. And I think that there will be at least one of those guys who has changed out to get a better recruiter there. All right, taking out the transfers. With knowing what you know today, which FSU recruiting class is better, 2018 or 2020? That's an interesting question. Let's go ahead and pull up those classes just to remember exactly who was in them. There's, of course, going to be some bias in this answer because the 2020 class has only been on campus for 2 years, where the 18 has been for 4. All right. Okay, let's see this. All right, 2020. Demore Tate, Brian Robinson, Chuba Purdy, Jadarius Green-McKnight, Lawrence Toafili, Stephen Dix, Ja'Kai Douglas, Corey Wren, Kentron Poitier, J.M. McCluster, Robert Scott, Sidney Williams, Josh Griffiths, Thomas Schrader, Tate Rodemaker, Darian Williamson, Zane Herring, LaDamian Webb, Carter Boatwright, T.J. Lundy, Lloyd Willis, T.J. Davis, Marcus and Douglas, Mastromano, the punter, Malachi Moore, and then obviously the transfers. Look, it's very hard to take out the transfers because those guys, they really did, they took they took a lot of transfers because they felt like that was the way to go, and they hit on some of those guys, and they didn't hit on some of those other guys. If you're not like one of the very best teams in the country, your hit rate on transfers is not going to be insane. You're going to have some hits, and you're going to have some real misses, and that's just kind of what happens. Let's go look at the 2018 class. We already know a little more about the 2018 class as far as his washout rate and hit rate and all that kind of stuff. So, Jaden Lars Woodby, A.J. Lighton, Asante Samuel, Robert Cooper, Warren Thompson, Trayshawn Harrison, Xavier Peters, Malcolm Lamar, Isaiah Bolden, Gaynor, Cam McDonald, Christian Meadows, Briggs, Jordan Young, Anthony Grant, Christian Armstrong, Chapman, Jalen Goes, Chaz Neal, and Keyshawn Hilton. I mean, I kind of lean towards 2018 ultimately as being better, but they're both bad, right? They're both really bad. This is what happens when you have an early signing period class. Your attrition rate, as far as guys who don't finish out their eligibility, and I take out dudes who go pro early of that, obviously, because that would be unfair to count that against a squad. It's going to be north of 70%. Like think about the guys who actually finished their eligibility at FSU in that 2018 class. So Samuel went pro early, but Woodby no, Lighton no, Cooper yes, Thompson no, Harrison no, Peters no, Lamar no, Bolden no, Gaynor yes, McDonald yes, Meadows no, Briggs yes, Jordan Young yes so far, Anthony Grant no, Armstrong no, Adams no, Chapman no, Goss yes, Chaz Neal no, and Keyshawn Hilton yes. I mean, that's well over half your dudes in that class who did not finish out their time at FSU, and some of them lasted not very long at all. Now let's look here at FSU for 2020 class. This is going to be higher numbers because you've only had dudes on campus for 2 years. But Demore Tate still around, Brian Robinson still around. Neither have been contributors at all so far. Purdy, the same thing, not a contributor. Green-McKnight, not a contributor at all. Toafili, third string running back at best. Stephen Dix hasn't seemed like he picked up the defense yet. Ja'Kai Douglas, somewhat of a contributor. Corey Wren, no. Kendron Poitier, no. McCluster, don't think he's ever going to play here. Robert Scott, that's a hit. Sidney Williams, I think, is a hit, probably. Griffiths is gone. Schrader has the injury and, just doesn't look like a guy who's going to be contributing anytime soon physically. So he really needs to get after it there now that he's, on sort of the tail end of that recovery process. Rodemaker, I don't think is going to do anything. Williamson, the receiver, we'll see. I mean, he couldn't really catch last year and in camp, but he's played more in games this year. I know he's had a couple decent practices. Zane Herring, we'll see. LaDamian Webb's already gone. Carter Boatwright, no, definitely not. DJ Lundy is in the lineup, so I guess we count him. Floyd Willis, I still have some hopes for. TJ Davis, probably not. Douglas, very questionable in my mind. Mastromano, the punter, and then he's a walk-on. He shouldn't be listed in the scholarship signing chart. So yeah, like those classes are both really bad. That really speaks to how bad FSU's roster is right now. They do not have functional depth at several positions. If the starters go down, the guys they have behind them are not ACC quality. Do you really want to throw another head coach in here anytime soon and have one of those classes? Because it's not just FSU. Even the staffs out there that are having success in the early signing period era, that first class they signed is terrible. Like the only one that's kept it together that I can find is Chip Kelly among the teams that like recruit, at a quote unquote high level. A&M's got like a 70+% attrition rate off their first class too. I think Florida was like the high 60s. So again, the kids you think you're getting in the early signing period signing day are probably available for a bad reason. Either they're a bad kid or they have a flaw that like the rating services didn't know about necessarily or didn't put enough weight into. And the coaching staffs out there who are established staffs probably in many cases passed on these kids. Not all of them, but a decent number of them, right? And you were available to get them for a reason and not a good one. Kind of like I talked about in the transfer portal. Okay, it's not that easy to find some of these guys in the transfer portal. So, anyway, yeah. All right, cool. Let's go ahead, and I have an email question that I have to find here. I thought I started. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so here's a question from Esty. And she writes, hey, my name is Esty. Rhymes with Zesty. Cool, I nailed it before I even read the pronunciation guide. Listener since Jimbo left, and my partner and I met y'all at the first Taggart spring game at the Champions Club. Awesome. As a research professor, I lean on y'all for evidence-driven analysis on FSU football. Thanks for keeping hyperbole to an absolute minimum. First time posing a question. I'm hearing talk about firing coaches, and to me, that seems counter to the need for continuity. Still, I understand the need to get a strong foundation to move on from ineffective coaching. Could you all give a cost-benefit analysis if, let's say, FSU decides to move on from a coordinator or a coach? How far would this set you back in a rebuild? It's an interesting question, right? I do think that changing coordinators and certainly some position coaches has a different effect than changing a head coach. Because if you change a head coach, everything changes. You're changing out everybody else. You have a top-down approach to like how you practice, how you eat team meals, how you lift. Everything changes. You can do a coordinator change where the most important, like where the biggest impact of that change is going to be the scheme and how things are taught. A coordinator change is no guarantee that you're going to play better on that side of the ball, right? So let's just say defense. But you could have a guy who gets in there and relates to the players better, somebody who they react to better, and I think that's possible. You could have a guy who runs a scheme that fits the player skills a little bit better, maybe who evaluates these players in a different way. Certainly, this defense is not playing with the confidence that it should have. This defense is not playing to the speed of the athletes that I believe it has, right? I'm not saying that they have a track team out there, but I've seen these guys run in like recruiting camp settings, and they clearly don't play to that athleticism, which to me means they're not fully bought into what the defensive staff is doing with them right now. Obviously, I think Woodson and Papuchis are extremely safe, but we'll see about some of those other spots as the season goes on. And I wouldn't expect like in-season changes. Obviously, I don't think there's really any need to do that at the current moment. But I'm sure everything's going to be on the table to be evaluated. It could also backfire. This would be what, the 1, 2, 3, technically 2, kind of 3. This would be like the 4th defensive coordinator in 5 years if they made a move. That's not a lot of continuity, right? that's not going to help. But if you think you got the wrong guy in there, or you think that maybe you have a guy you liked, but it's just not gelling with the recruits and with the players, you got to go ahead and make a change. All right, this has been the Nolecast. Really appreciate it, and we're at 45 minutes. I will see you all again, literally on Thursday or Friday, for our Syracuse preview. And make sure you tune into that. I've been looking into Syracuse quite a bit, even though I'm not real confident in this FSU team right now, especially with who's out and hurt. I think some of the matchups dictate that I might actually fire in a pick for FSU here in this game. I'm looking at it a little more, trying to see if I'm missing anything. But this actually could be a game where some of FSU's strengths match up pretty well to gain an advantage over some of the Syracuse weaknesses. So anyway, stay tuned next time.